She was driving home, a quiet evening, nothing unusual, until flashing red and blue lights appeared in her mirror. An elderly black woman, alone on the road, suddenly became a target. But this wasn't about speeding or a broken light. No, this was about something deeper, something uglier. The way the officer looked at her, the way his tone cut sharp, it was clear. This was racism, unfolding in real time. Yet what he didn't know was who she really was, and what would happen next would shock him and everyone watching. It was a quiet evening drive. Margaret, a respected grandmother in her community, enjoyed these moments. Windows down, the hum of the engine steady, the world outside calm. At 70 years old, she had built a life defined by discipline, fairness, and service, though few knew the weight of her title. To most, she was simply a kind neighbor, a woman of wisdom and dignity. But that night, as she steered her car along an empty stretch of road, the ordinary faded into something else. Far behind her, headlights appeared, closing in. She didn't realize it yet, but those lights carried more than just a routine stop. They carried judgment, prejudice, and a test she never asked for. The headlights drew closer until they flooded Margaret's rearview mirror. A sharp whoop of the siren cut through the night. Her stomach tightened, though she knew she had done nothing wrong. She eased the car to the shoulder, hands steady on the wheel. Experience had taught her the rules. Comply, stay calm, don't give them a reason. But as the officer approached, his flashlight slicing through the glass, she felt something different. His eyes didn't scan her license plate or her hands. They scanned her skin. He tapped the glass hard like she was already guilty. License and registration. The words weren't a request. They were a command laced with suspicion. Margaret passed the documents with careful composure, but the officer's smirk didn't fade. He looked at her papers, then back at her face, and chuckled under his breath. Out this late? Ma'am, where exactly are you heading? It wasn't a routine question. It was an interrogation. Each word dripped with doubt, with the kind of tone that told her this wasn't about traffic law. It was about control. Margaret answered politely, her voice calm, though her heart raced. But the officer leaned closer, his flashlight burning into her eyes, as if daring her to flinch. Minutes stretched like hours. Another patrol car rolled up, lights flaring, and suddenly 2 officers stood at her door. Whispers passed between them, quick glances exchanged, followed by laughter she wasn't meant to hear. They circled her car, shining lights across the back seat, the trunk, even her shoes on the floor mat. Margaret sat still, dignity wrapped around her like armor. But the truth was undeniable. She wasn't seen as a citizen, or even as a woman. She was seen only as black. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel, but she kept them high, visible. She remembered every story, every tragedy that started with a simple stop. The officer's questions grew sharper, more invasive, as if hoping she'd snap. Why are you in this neighborhood? You sure this is your car? The words pierced, each one an accusation. Margaret could feel her patience thinning, but she knew. One wrong tone, one wrong look, and this night could end very differently. And then, the search began. Without explanation, one officer pulled open her door. The cold night air rushed in as he ordered her out of the vehicle. Margaret's knees wavered as she stepped onto the gravel shoulder, her documents still clutched in her hand. She wasn't treated like a driver. They treated her like a suspect, a criminal, someone who didn't belong. The flashing lights reflected against her glasses, blinding, disorienting. Neighbors peeked from porches, cars slowed as they passed. The humiliation stung worse than the fear, because she had lived long enough to know this wasn't about law, it was about power. What the officers didn't realize was that the woman they were mocking, the one they pushed to the roadside as though she were invisible, carried a title that could change their futures forever. And soon, they were about to find out. Margaret stood on the gravel, the cold air biting her skin, as two officers loomed over her. One rifled through her car without permission, tossing aside papers and belongings as if they were worthless. The other circled her slowly, his flashlight grazing her face, her hair, her hands. Every movement screamed accusation, though she had done nothing wrong. "Admit it," one officer snapped. "This car isn't yours, is it?" His words were sharp, cruel, spoken with the confidence of someone certain he'd never be challenged. The humiliation was suffocating. Stripped of her humanity, treated like a criminal on the roadside, Margaret felt the weight of every injustice carried by those who came before her. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Fear crept in, because she knew how these stories sometimes ended. Too many names, too many funerals. And now here she was, a 70-year-old black woman, surrounded, cornered, powerless under the flashing lights. But then, the laughter came. Cruel, mocking. The officers traded jokes about Grandma taking a joyride, their smirks lit by the glow of their cruisers. Each word burned deeper than the cold air. Margaret clenched her hands tight, forcing herself to breathe steady. Yet beneath that calm exterior, something shifted. She was not just a woman pulled over on the side of the road, she was more. And when her calm voice finally cut through the noise, it silenced everything. "Officer," she said, steady as stone, "do you know who I am?" The words hung heavy, slicing through the arrogance, the mockery, the assumed power. In that moment, the roles were about to change. Because the woman they had humiliated, degraded, and dismissed was a Supreme Court judge. The silence that followed Margaret's words was heavier than the night itself. The officers froze, their arrogance evaporating as the truth sank in. A Supreme Court judge, standing on the roadside, treated like a criminal, mocked, degraded. The smirks vanished, replaced with stammering excuses and hurried attempts to smooth things over. But the damage was done. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone carried a weight that crushed their authority into dust. With quiet dignity, she gathered her things, returned to her car, and drove away. But what lingered wasn't relief. It was a bitter truth, because her title had saved her, not her humanity. Without that robe, without that power, how differently might this story have ended? That's the weight of racism. It doesn't pause to ask who you are, what you've achieved, or how long you've served. To those blinded by prejudice, skin color erases everything else. And for millions of others who don't wear a robe, who don't hold a title, there is no reveal that forces respect, only silence, humiliation, and too often tragedy. Margaret's story is more than a single incident. It's a mirror held up to the world we live in. A world where dignity is conditional and justice bends depending on who's standing on the other side of the badge. So the question remains, how many more lives must be scarred before change becomes real? How many more headlights in the rearview mirror must fill hearts with fear? Because until racism is confronted, not excused, not ignored, it will keep rewriting stories just like this one. And the next victim may not have the power to speak back.